Welcome everyone to Julia de Burgos Cultural Arts Center and Cuyahoga Arts and Culture Taino Resurgence discussion. I'm Lynette Ramos and I'm an artist, a part of a collective initiative of the center called Unidos por Arte, which is United by Art. Today we'll be discussing Taino spirituality with Miguel Sague. Miguel Sague was born in Santiago, Cuba. He is a researcher and the author of Ganoa, Taino Indigenous Dream River Journey, which is available at Amazon.com. He founded the Caney Indigenous Spiritual Circle in 1981 and is currently a tekina or teacher. Welcome, Miguel. Thank you so much for being here. Miguel, let's begin with, if you can help us to understand God in terms of the ancient versus the modern times, and also discuss the gender association. So who is God to our ancestors?
Well, yeah, so in terms of this, the theme of our discussion today, which is the spirituality of the Taino Resurgence movement, I'm going to give you the perspective of our organization, of the Caney Indigenous Spiritual Circle, with the understanding, of course, that there are many different Taino groups that take part of the Taino Resurgence movement, and their perspective may vary from one to the other. So I'm going to give you ours. In our tradition, we believe in a supreme deity, which we call Yaya Wature. The word Yaya has been passed down to us through the writings of the Spanish chronicler, Fray Ramon Pané, who wrote down information that was given to him by Taino informants in 1498. And the word Yaya in itself is composed of the duplication or the repetition of the word Ya. Ya in itself means soul. But when you repeat it 2 times, it magnifies the meaning of the word and it becomes the supreme soul or the great spirit. Yaya Wature. And Wature means our sky. So when we say Yaya Wature, we mean the Great Spirit. Now, the Great Spirit is the union of 2 component entities which make up that Great Spirit. And we know from our research, from the knowledge that has been passed down to us, and also from the knowledge of other researchers beside ourselves, that the ancient Tainos perceived the Great Spirit as a combination of 2 elements that represented the 2 halves, the 2 balanced opposites, harmonious, complementary opposites of divinity, a male element and a female element. And they have names. The male element is called Yokahu, the Lord of Life. The female element is Atabei, the cosmic matriarch. And together they make Yaya Wature, the supreme being.
Thank you. So can you talk about the Great Spirit and the elements of both genders?
Okay. So Yaya Wature is everything. It encompasses everything. There's a kind of, I think our tradition is described by people that study these things as animistic, which means that we believe that everything is alive and everything has a life force of its own, a unique life force of its own. It's not the same. My life force is not the same as, say, this clay pot. It has its own life force. So, and this rattle has its own life force. Okay, so a plant has its own life force, like that beautiful plant that you have behind you in your room. So each thing has its own unique life force, and it's not the same as the other one. So all of these elements of life, of energy, of existence, make up Yaya Guature, the Great Spirit. Mm-hmm. So Yaya Guature manifests itself in the combination of two component entities. And I'm going to start with Atabey because for a number of reasons. Because we believe that she has preponderance. She comes first. She's the mother spirit. She is the nurturing spirit. She is the entity from which all things emerge. We see her in terms of the possessor of the cosmic womb, which in Taino tradition is symbolized by many different objects, many different symbols. We see her womb represented in the Higuera gourd, which this gourd is a very unique fruit that hangs from a special tree, from the Higuera tree that grows in the Caribbean. It's a round, large round object. And we see this fruit, this thing that when it dries, it actually feels and acts like a gourd. So if you think of a gourd, that's what it's only very strong, a very hardy gourd that doesn't break very easily. And it has seeds inside. So the fact that this object has seeds inside gives it that energy of something from which things can be born. So that is one of the symbols of Atabey's womb. Atabey's womb is the source of all that exists. We have an ancient legend, an ancient creation narrative, which we in the Caney Circle called the Taino Chronicles. And that ancient narrative, that creation narrative, speaks about things coming out of a cave. So since Atabey is perceived to be the manifestation of Mother Earth, when something comes out of a cave, you see, it's coming out of her body. It's coming out of her uterus, her womb. And in our creation narrative, we have two instances of things coming out of that cave. The sun and the moon come out of that cave, and that cave manifests itself in that story, in that episode of the narrative, in the form of a cave called Iguanaboina, which has elements of reptilian elements, which we associate reptiles with Mother Earth. So that's creation of the sun and the moon from Atabey's womb. We also talk about the creation of humanity. Humanity emerges from another cave, which is called Casibahagua. Again, that is a manifestation. That is a symbol of the opening from the body of Atabey. So you see, in our tradition, everything is born from Atabey. We don't have something similar to, say, Judeo-Christian tradition, in which creation happens as a result of the word of God. In Judeo-Christian tradition, God says, let there be light, or let there be earth, or let there be animals. And then from the word, from the logos, comes creation. We have a totally different interpretation of that. In the way our ancestors say, things don't just happen from the word. They happen, they come, they emerge from the womb of the earth matriarch. So the other element of Yaya Guature is Yokahu, the Lord of Life. Yokahu, the Lord of Life, is first of all the son of Atabey, because he is born of Atabey just like the rest of us, just like everything else. He comes out of that same womb. He manifests all energy. The energy, for instance, especially the energy that we receive from the sun. So he is associated with the sun. The ancient Tainos spoke to Ramon Pane, the chronicler, and told him that Yokahu lives in the sky. So we know that Yokahu is a manifestation of the sun because the sun lives in the sky. So you see, the sun is the source of all the energy that accounts for life on earth. So if it wasn't for the sun, there would be no life on earth. You and I would not exist. That beautiful plant behind you would not exist. And talking about plants, that plant is green. That's a very important aspect of our interpretation of Yokahu, the Lord of Life. Green, it is green because it has chlorophyll. And the job of chlorophyll is to convert solar energy into plant energy, into energy that can then be used by us through the process of photosynthesis. That's a magic, powerful, wonderful, magical process that plants use to transform solar energy into plant and animal energy. Then we come to the plant and we eat the plant, and the solar energy becomes us. We manifest solar energy by living. So we're hot, we're warm. If you take my temperature, I will register 98 point something. I'm warm inside. There's a fire inside me. That's Yokahu inside me. That's the Lord of Life. This is a Taino. This is a replica of the Taino representation of Yokahu, the Lord of Life. This is the way we manifest him. One of the manifestations of Yokahu, the Lord of Life. Yokahu is energy. Yokahu is the sun. But Yokahu is also the plant that transforms solar energy into life on earth. So that's the two elements of Yaya Guature, the maternal female Atabe and the energy spirit Yokahu.
Okay, beautiful. So let's talk a little bit more about Atabe and how she's regarded as the mother and also associated with the earth and the ocean. You know, we had a conversation before and you talked about the connection between the water and the bloodstream of the earth and the water composition. So if you could elaborate on that, that would be great.
Yes. So when you think of Atabe, one of the manifestations of Atabe, of course, she has many manifestations. One of the manifestations of Atabe is the earth, the physical earth itself.
Yeah.
She has other manifestations, but let's speak to that one because that's the one that you asked about. When we in the Caney circle speak of Atabe as Mother Earth, Atabe, the ocean, all water, not just the ocean. Let's speak about all the waters of the earth. Rivers, streams, creeks, lakes, lagoons, and of course, the sea. They all are the manifestation of the blood of the earth. In fact, ocean water, if it's analyzed chemically, it turns out that the chemical composition of ocean water is very similar to the chemical composition of human blood. So it's an interesting metaphor, a natural metaphor. Human blood is a metaphor of the ocean, and the ocean is a metaphor of human blood. And isn't it amazing? Atabe manifests her fertility because she is this ever fertile entity that gives birth all the time giving birth. She manifests her fertility in the 28-day cycle of the moon. 28 days of the moon cycle, the lunar cycle of the moon. The moon, throughout that cycle, causes the waters of the earth, especially the ocean, to rise and fall with the marine tides. So at a certain time of the month, the marine tide is at a certain level. At another time of the month, the marine tide is at another level. So the moon is manifests that fertility through the rise and fall of the tides. Well, what happens in a human woman? A human woman also has a 28-day cycle of fertility. A human woman that is still in child, can still have children, that has not gone through menopause, also has a 28-day cycle, a monthly cycle. And how does that cycle manifest itself? Through the rise and fall of her blood. So here's this incredible, wonderful link between the human woman and the divine woman through that cycle, the lunar cycle. That's why we in the Caney circle celebrate that lunar cycle. And we believe that when we do that, we're actually maintaining and upholding an ancient tradition of our ancestors who also celebrated that monthly cycle. Mm-hmm. So that's why we celebrate the full moon ceremony every month to honor, to celebrate that cycle between the divine, which is Atabe, mm-hmm. and the human, which is half of the population of the earth, human women. So that's how we perceive this connection between Atabe as the Mother Earth and the blood of Atabe.
Beautiful. That's fascinating. So naturally, let's switch gears and talk about Yokahu. And why is he known as the Lord of Life and Energy? You talked a little bit about, the influence or the connection with the sun. And I remember when we talked before, it was like this, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost not contradictory, but kind of ironic, like the sky and then elements of the earth. If you could elaborate on that.
Let's speak about that, because that's an interesting irony, if you want to use that word. Yokahu was described to Ramon Panay by our ancestors as living in the sky, dwelling in the sky. Today is the name of the sky. So Yokahu lives in the sky. And so it's logical for us to think of Yokahu, even though the ancient Tainos did not speak to Ramon Panay in terms of the sun. They didn't say that it was the sun, but we rise to that conclusion because this entity, this important male entity, they said lives in the sky. And so we have come to the conclusion that it was the sun, that it represents the sun. But there's more to this. There's more than meets the eye. Because you see, they identified this entity with the name Yokahu. And the word Yokahu, one of the elements of that name is the word yucca. That's an important aspect of this revelation, because yucca is the word that we use for a plant that provides food that is also known as yucca or mandioca or mandioca or tapioca or tapioca. All of those words, by the way, are related, obviously. That plant, yucca, mandioca, manioc, it's also called manioc. All of those words are all about one plant. And this is our sacred plant, the sacred plant of the Tainos. Why was it our sacred plant? Why is it still our sacred plant, the sacred plant of the Taino? Because this plant is the plant that is our staff of life. Just like maize is the staff of life of the ancient Aztecs and Mayas, because that's the plant that provided them with the most important source of caloric energy that kept them alive. Caloric energy is what keeps us alive. It's that gift of life. right? So yuca, that is what yuca is for us. In Asia, it's rice. That's their staff of life.
Mhm.
They depend on rice for their for the basic element of energy. In the Middle East, in the area of the Fertile Crescent of uh, and of Egypt, it became wheat, and also Europe. So that became the staff of life of those people. They made bread out of it. And most people that that have a starchy, energy-rich food like that usually make some sort of food. They manufacture some sort of food that is easily kept, easily stored, and eaten. So in, like I said, in the Middle East and Europe, they make bread. We Tainos, and in Central America, in Mesoamerica, the Aztecs and the Maya make tortillas. That's their bread. We Tainos have our own bread. We call it casabe. And because of that word, casabe, that's another word by which the original plant has also been identified, although I kind of shy away from calling it cassava because that's the name of the bread that we make out of it. I prefer to call the plant itself yucca. So let's talk about the yucca. The yucca is an interesting plant. Its roots are long. They almost look like this rattle. They have this long oblong shape, and they're very, very long. They're very big. Some of them are this long, brown objects that grow under the earth. That's the part that our ancestors and we consume in the form of casabe, bread. That plant, the most important, significant part of that plant grows under the earth. That's where we have this conundrum, okay? Because he is named after that plant, yucca hu. We say yucca hu means soul of the yucca plant, right? So he's named after a thing, an element that grows underneath the ground in darkness, underneath the ground. So how do we associate him with a spirit that lives in the sky? How can we associate an object that matures in the darkness underground, inside the womb of Atabe, inside the belly of the earth matriarch? How do we associate that with somebody that lives in the sky? Well, this is where here's where the trick is, okay? That root, that tuber, which is kind of like compare it to a potato. If you're not familiar with a yucca, think of a potato. That tuber, the way that it becomes what it is because that plant above the ground is standing there with its leaves, which by the way are shaped like hands because they got fingers, you know? So the leaves of the yucca plant is standing there above ground, receiving and welcoming the rays, the energy of the sun onto its green leaves, welcoming that energy into its body, using photosynthesis to turn that energy of the sun into starch, carbohydrate energy, and storing it underground in the roots. So when we come along and pull that root out, when yucca hu gives up his life because he is a sacrificial entity, he has to sacrifice himself to manifest his highest potential. So when he dies at harvest time and sacrifices himself so that we can live, solar energy then is brought out of the ground and we consume it. The yucca root is processed. It is turned into nutritious cassava bread, and then we eat it. and we take on the solar energy that developed underground in the darkness inside Atabe's womb. We eat it, and then we manifest solar energy inside us by giving off heat and energy and speaking and living.
I love it. I mean, I think that, you know, many ancient cultures have that shamanic foundation, which is essentially just being really in touch with the elements, the earth, the sky. And so the way that you describe this, it's very literal. You know, it's not a theory. It really is just that cycle of creation that I feel like they embodied.
That's right. It's not poetry. It's not poetic. It is literal. And the same thing goes again for Atabes. When we say the blood of the earth, that really is blood. Blood is ocean water. Take my word for it. We're not being poetic. We're being literal.
Yeah. That one, I feel like that could be like a rabbit hole in and of itself. All right. So speaking of which, that's actually the next question. Would you elaborate on how the Caribbean Sea came into being and the relation with the uterine or amniotic fluid?
You know, I'm going to tell you that episode of the sacred narrative, of the creation narrative, because it's an interesting story.
Okay.
The ancestors say that in ancient times, a human being who was the first human being came out of Casibahagua cave and set up life, built a hut, a house, a bohío, and had the crops planted and was growing crops in the fields. This human being, in our interpretation, in the interpretation of the Caney Circle, in our interpretation of the Caney Circle, this human being acquired the same name as the Great Spirit because it was like the Great Spirit. It manifested intelligence and reason and logic like the Great Spirit. And so like the Great Spirit, that person was also called Yaya. To differentiate the human Yaya from the divine Yaya, we call the human Yaya, Yaya Lokuo. And we get that word from the language of our cousins, our Carib cousins, who are called Kalinago, living in the island of Dominica, not to be confused with Dominican Republic. It's a smaller island called Dominica. And their name for the first human is Lokuo. So we have borrowed that word to differentiate this human who has the name of the Great Spirit. So Yaya Lokuo, who shares the name with Yaya Guaturei, the Great Spirit, lived on the earth, planting and so forth. And he was visited by 4 very mischievous boys. These were quadruplets. They were all born from the same woman, Itiba Kahubaba, who is one of the many manifestations of Atabe. She is the human manifestation of Atabe. And as a human being, she was mortal. And it turns out that she died in childbirth. So when she died, they had to take those boys out of her through cesarean section operation. They had to cut her belly open to save those 4 boys. So those 4 boys grew up and became young men. And they were crazy, okay? They were always going and getting into trouble and getting into mischief and doing all kinds of crazy things. So it turns out that Yaya Lokuo had a son. And his son did not get along with Yaya Lokuo, with the ancestral, the original human. They got into so many fights and so many negative interactions that Yaya Lokuo finally said, "You got to get out of here. you cannot live under my roof anymore. Go. And so this youth had to go off, was sent off for 4 months. He had to wander the earth by himself. He finally came back, but instead of asking for forgiveness, he was again violent, and almost he got into a fight. And in that fight, unfortunately, the child was killed. Yaya Lokua was inconsolable, so sad, because certainly did not mean for the son to be killed. The son was called Yaya, which literally means son of Yaya, child of Yaya. So Yaya Lokuo performed the funerary ceremonies of the ancient Tainos, which included processing the remains of the dead person. One of the ways in which that was done, that it has been confirmed, is that the remains of the dead person is put in the ground, and after decomposition takes place, the bones are taken out, and sometimes the bones are cremated. And so the powder that's left, or the little bits of bones that are left, are put into a large higuera gourd, and that higuera gourd is hung from the rafters of the bohío hut. So he did that. Yaya Lokuo did that. Put the remains of his son in this higuera gourd, and would come on different occasions and pour out the bones and look at them and weep. His salty tears would go into these bones. Some Tainos believe that there was magic in those salty tears, and the bones turned into fish, and the whole gourd was filled with seawater, which there is a symbolism there. We see the gourd as the womb of Atabe, because we believe, and this is something that we in Caney Indigenous Spiritual Circle tradition, we teach that the soul of people that die return to the womb of Atabe, the place where we came from. So it's kind of like a cycle. We go back to the place where we came from. We go back to the womb of Atabe. We call that place from whence we came Kwaibai, the realm of the ancestors, the realm of the dead. And so Kwaibai in this case manifests itself in a symbolic gourd, a magic receptacle in which life can be renovated and from which new life can come again. So it's almost like reincarnation in a way. Not exactly the way that the Hindus believe, but it's close to it, because we believe that our ancestors go back to Kwaibai, and from their energy are born new people. So it's almost like like reincarnation, and that concept, that idea of reincarnation, is actually confirmed by the research of a famous researcher called Maria Proviones Bishop. That in fact, the womb of Atabe is like the earth in which the dead fruit and dead plant leaves from the forest fall, and from that death comes new life, new things are born from the earth. That's what the way she manifested, or the way she represented it in her book, The Bat and the Guava. So we see this gourd as the manifestation of Atabe's womb, in which life can be renovated. And guess what happened? The tears of Yaya Lokua transformed those bones into fish, new life. And they were swimming around in the water, in salty water, which is like the amniotic fluid inside a womb. So when Yaya Lokua came to this gourd, he said, "Oh, there are fish growing in there. And the fish also fed him. So it was like a nourishment, like a spiritual nourishment from these fish of his son's remains. Here come the four brothers one day, unexpectedly, without any warning, while Yaya Lokua was in the fields, tending to the crop, to the maize, the corn, the yucca plants, the beans, in the conuco fields. Here comes these four boys looking for food. And what do they find? The big gourd hanging. They had heard that that gourd contained fish, and they were hungry for fish. So they brought down the gourd. The gourd was hanging from these long strings, these long twine, these long ropes, thin ropes, twine. And they brought it down and started eating the fish. They were eating the fish as fast as they could. They heard Yaya Lokua coming, and they said, "Ooh, boy, the old man's coming back." So they ran out of the hut like the mischievous, silly boys that they were. And here's the main one, was called Deminan Caracaracol. And here's Deminan trying to hang this gourd back up. But he didn't do it correctly. As he ran out, the gourd fell. And when it fell, it broke and shattered. And out of there started flowing all this salt water and fish. And that salt water inundated all the low places and created the Caribbean Sea.
I love that story. So the Taino were a matriarchal society. Would you elaborate on what that means and how that changed over time?
Yes, so we know for a fact, because it has been researched by a number of researchers, both Taino and non-Taino, and the majority of us agree that the ancient Tainos were at least matrilineal, meaning to say, like the North American Iroquois, the Longhouse people, the Onwe, who some people call the Iroquois, that the inheritance, whether it's the inheritance of family name, the inheritance of clan membership, the inheritance of ownership of certain objects and certain things, was passed through the mother's line. So you inherited things that were your mother's or your mother's brothers or sisters. You don't inherit things that come from your father's line. You inherit things that come from your mother's line, whether you're a man or a woman. So that's one thing that has been confirmed. But there are some of us that also extend that. And we don't just say that it's matrilineal. We say that it's matrifocal. In other words, we believe that when a bohío was built, even though it may have been built by men, it belonged to the woman of the house. The mother owned that bohío. People lived in their mother's house, just like in the case of the North American Iroquois. Also, in their case, people live in the building in which they live is owned by the different women that live there. It goes beyond that. Our ancient narrative states that the original chief, a man by the name of Guajayona, was anointed chief by a woman that healed him when he was sick. He got real sick, and she healed him by putting him in a place called Guanara or Guanara. And we in the Caney circle interpret that place to be a sweat lodge, because we know that there was a tradition of sweat lodges in Central America among the Maya, who called their sweat lodges Tuj, and the Aztecs, who called their sweat lodges Temazcal. So this tradition of sweat lodge exists in Central America. And we believe that our Taino ancestors also had a sweat lodge tradition, and we called it Wanara. She put him in that, healed him, cured him of a sickness, and then when he came out reborn, he was almost dying, reborn, she anointed him chief, put around his neck the sacred guanin, which is a medallion. I don't know whether Cacique Mucaro spoke about the medallion or whether he was wearing it. The medallion is his symbol. He was being too humble. He is entitled to wear a necklace with a big round medallion called a guanin, which is made of an alloy of gold. And that is the symbol of the cacique, of the chief. She is the one that put that around his neck. She also gave him some important sacred stones called cibas, which probably were both regular stones and crystals around, to tie around his arms. She anointed him chief in the same way that in North, and I keep making the reference to North American indigenous people, the Iroquois, because there are many similarities and many parallels between the two. Here in North America, where I live in Pennsylvania, the Iroquois people, the chief, when there was a new chief that was installed, it was all done by women. The clan mothers would do it. By the same token, we believe that that was also done by the Tainos, that it was a group of important women who presided over the installation of a new cacique. And that tradition comes down to us from the old legend, from the narration, the sacred narration of the sacred healer woman, the first Bejique, the first healer, Guabonito, who healed the first chief, Guajayona, and then installed him as chief. So all of these things point to a very elevated social status for women among the Tainos.
And when did that begin to change? And maybe it didn't change with the Tainos, but in terms of just the line, you know, with our history, and, you know, obviously last week we talked about colonialism. What were some of the things that began to change that? I'm assuming it's tied to the colonialism, because we even talked about how, you know, the authors and all of that looked at it more from the patriarchal perspective. That's
correct. So the Taino people maintained that matrifocal tradition all the way to the moment of the arrival of the Europeans in the Caribbean. We believe that even it's even evident that some caciques, which usually were male, most chiefs were male, but there were female caciques. We know that for a fact. We know of several. The one that most people usually bring up is a famous historical female cacique called Anacaona. So even the position of cacique could be acquired or achieved by a woman. So this importance, this social political importance of women in Taino culture, of course, suffered tremendously upon the arrival of the Spanish. The Spanish imposed a subjection, a form of slavery called the encomienda system, in which Taino communities were actually put in under the control of individual Spanish colonists. Like a Spanish colonist who had done a good job was given an encomienda of like 20, 30, 40, 50 Taino, the whole village of Tainos under his. The Tainos were allowed to live in their own village. They were allowed to continue living, but they had to work for him. it was essentially what we call the feudal system, which the Spanish brought from Europe and imposed it on the Tainos. In Europe, it was a recognized thing that had existed throughout the Middle Ages, where people of high rank would essentially own whole communities of people. They were allowed to live in their own houses, and then they would farm and produce food for the lord, the manor of the castle, the lord of the castle, and he would get a certain percentage of everything they produced. If there were mines on his land, then those people had to mine the land, and they would give all the resource that came out of those mines to the lord, and he would become enriched by their free labor, because he wasn't feeding them. I mean, he wasn't paying them. They had to feed themselves. So they transplanted that system of serfdom from Europe right to the Caribbean. And these encomiendas, these Tainos, had to work for the Spanish lord. Of course, the Spanish lord was almost always a man. Women didn't have very high status, except, of course, in the royalty. The Queen of Spain was a woman. But mostly it was a very male-oriented culture that was imposed in the Caribbean. And that began to transform in the mind of our people what it was to be a woman, what it represented, what femaleness represents. That ate into our brains. A lot of that process, we call it the colonized mind. Our ancestors slowly, over those 500 years, from the 1490s to now, that process took place. And now part of what we do in this movement that we call the Taino Resurgence movement is to strive to decolonize our people. And it isn't just about how we perceive our women. It's about a lot of other things. How we perceive our land, how we perceive our identity as human beings in and outside the Caribbean, because we have a considerable diaspora all over the world, especially in North America. There's many of us living in North America and in other parts of the world. So this Taino diaspora, we have to bring this gift of decolonization to all of our people living in the homeland, in the Caribbean homeland, or living in diaspora.
Mm-hmm. I think, and one of the questions that we actually have that maybe we can address now and kind of couple this together, but you're gonna elaborate or talk about all of this historical information or these myths, these stories, however you want to look at it, literal or not. Why is this important to people today? And also this way of thinking could be very threatening for people that don't know about the history or that have their own personal views, which is fine. So we want to basically, in my opinion, want to build this space where it's not threatening, it's just informative and gives people some foundation. So why is all this information important for us today?
That's a very important point that you made. The idea that the Caney Circle maintains an attitude towards all of this that is shared by many, not all, unfortunately, not all Taino Resurgence Tainos, but many of us, that we must share these teachings about our ancestry, about our tradition, about our history, in a way that does not impose anything on anybody by force. For example, the whole idea of the divine supreme being as an entity that is composed of two elements, male and female, that can be a little shocking to some people that have grown up in a culture in which God is male. And you can't not, or even in new people, in the new times, where some people accept the idea of a divine entity that's female, then it's a goddess. So more prolonged, God as a male, God the Father, God the Creator. And then now many people see the goddess, and then that's the divine entity. So the idea of a divine supreme being that is actually both, that can be a little like, wait a minute, where did that come from? You know? So we do not want to impose that on anybody. We accept all Tainos who come to us with questions, with the thirst for knowledge. We share everything that we have with them, but we don't impose our judgment on them. If they cannot accept any particular element of what we're saying, well, that's okay. You're still a Taino. We have friends and relatives who don't even follow this spiritual system. They have grown up Christian. Many Tainos are Christian. In other words, they've been brought up either Catholic or some flavor of Protestant, okay? And they are Tainos. Just because they don't follow the belief in Yokahu and Atabe doesn't mean that they're not Tainos. We accept them as brothers and sisters. If someday they feel that they can accept this tradition, this spiritual tradition that we have, wonderful. We love that. If they can't, that's okay too. Right? So that's what we come with. So I'm trying to express to you how it's important for all of us to adopt this attitude, because there's a lot of that conflict going on in the Taino resurgence movement, especially some of our people who have readopted the ancient spiritual tradition and then react to Tainos that have not, and who still cling to the Christian tradition. Oh, you shouldn't do that. You're a traitor to our culture. That's not a good way. That's not a good way. That's not something that we feel is right.
It's a sensitive thing, right? Because, you know, when you grow up with something, it's difficult to come away from that, especially something as sacred as your relationship with the divine. You know, most people, quote unquote, want to get it right. You know, they want to you know, do things in honor and respect. And so sometimes to deviate from what you're used to is difficult. So I really can appreciate your take or your perspective. It's very all-inclusive. It's very forgiving. It's very accepting.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's the way it ought to be for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that, you know, as I've been researching and, you know, you've kind of sent me on different paths and, you know, one of the things that stuck out to me is in the creation story of Atabe, it talks about, first of all, time is it's an interesting thing, right? Like that can bring in like quantum physics, like it begins, but there's no beginning and end. So that's all an interesting thing with the creation story.
Creation is going on all the time. Creation is not something that happened in the past. Creation is past, present, and future.
I have to sit with that. I like that. That gives me that gives me perspective. That makes sense. What I found fascinating and I think is relevant to today is it talked about that there's a void, right? That in the beginning, or whatever we call it, right? That there was a void, and the way that Atabe created life was through her thought, her will, and her power. And that made me think about how can people create today? How can we be a part of that creation cycle? Because as many traditions will say, we are co-creators. So I thought that the creation story has something for us to learn from beyond just where do things begin.
I believe that all of us should be Yaya Lokuo, the human divine, okay? That, remember, Yaya Lokuo was the first human, and Yaya Lokuo manifested in like a mirror image, like a human mirror image of the divine entity. So Yaya Lokuo, we're all Yaya Lokuo. We should encompass within us that balance of the creative female and the energetic male. We are both male and female. We should manifest that within ourselves. We should find those of us that identify as male should dig down inside ourselves and search and discover the female inside us and bring her out and nurture her and make her part of who we are and express her in the form of creativity. And what's creativity? Well, for you and me, we're artists. I mean, I made this thing here. I carved that thing there and I paint.
Amazing.
So that's one way of being creative, by producing art. But you know, obviously, that there's many other ways of being creative. When a person comes up with a wonderful idea, let's say somebody works in a company and they come up with an awesome idea that helps to promote the goals of that company. They come to their boss and their boss rewards them in one way with a promotion or something like that. That's a form of creativity. A woman that gives birth to a child is being creative. A man that produces love for that child is being creative. Thinking of new things is creativity. That is all Atabe. That's all Atabe. The energy, the ability to move things forward, to get things going, to keep things going, to get that heat going. That's Yokahu, the Lord of Life. That's Yokahu, the Lord of Energy. So it's that balance of the male and the female inside each human body, whether that person identifies as male or that person identifies as female or that person identifies as any other gender identification.
That's a big topic now. And I think that whether a person again identifies with the creation story as a myth or as, literal, I think many would argue that that's what society is trying to do, is to integrate these different aspects of ourselves, whether that's gender or not, whether that's just the archetype or the, what is internal. And one could also argue that the patriarchal system has kind of created kind of something that's more one-dimensional versus having these different aspects. And that is part of what we're looking to do now, is to create more harmony within ourselves and then with each other and the planet. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I worked with a archaeology researcher for some time when I was doing a lot of my research on Maya culture. And one of the things that he promoted was leaving behind a separation from the concept of dualism. I don't completely agree with him because dualism is part of what we are. The opposites, the complementary opposites, male, female, up, down, good, bad, dark, light. All of those are important in the Taino perception of reality, duality. But at the same time, we should not get entrapped by duality. We should not get caught in a trap by duality. Duality is a sacred understanding, and it always should be perceived from the perception, from the point of view of harmony. Harmony. Not that you need to go this side because it's good and avoid that side because it's bad. This is virtuous, that is unvirtuous. We don't have a heaven and hell in Taino culture. We have understanding. We have comprehension. We understand things. Do we believe that some things can be destructive to the present condition of humanity? Yes, and we should avoid destructive behavior, destructive attitude. But we don't go into the whole good and bad thing. That is a slippery slope.
So then I'm just kind of thinking about someone that may challenge you. So how is there any accountability if there's no good and bad?
Accountability comes in the form of responsibility to the creation. I'll give you an example. In the Taino narrative, there was an episode in which these people, everybody was living inside the cave Casibahagua, and things were getting bad. The way we interpret that story, things were getting bad and they didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough medicinal herbs. So people were sent out to find food. The whole community had not gone out because they did not know, they did not believe that the world was ready for them yet. The world was not fully formed. So they had to stay inside the cave. So these brave people were sent out, just a group, to fish. And they did. They found a place to fish and they were getting all this fish, but instead of bringing it back to the cave to share with the community, they ate it all. And the power of judgment, which is called Wakar, the Lord of trials, punished them by having the sun turn them into trees. They were punished. There's a lesson there. There's a lesson. In that lesson, selfishness is counterproductive to the welfare of the community. And selfishness needs to be sanctioned, needs to be punished in some way. But we don't say the fishermen were evil, they were bad, and the people in the cave were good. We don't go to that extreme. We just say that they made a terrible mistake, and their mistake, their destructive action is sanctioned by the deities, by the Samis. That's what we call our deities, Samis. And there's punishment involved. You see how the way that we interpret that, we don't go to that good evil thing. They're not bad. They're just, they have to be corrected. Humans get corrected. We make mistakes. And Wakar, the Lord of trials, is always there to manifest what happens when you make these kinds of errors. The stroke on the head. Wakar is pictured by this powerful entity with a club, a manaya, a hatchet in his hand, and he hits you over the head. That is the result of these errors. And so you're not sent to hell for the rest of eternity because you committed an error. You're corrected. That's how we see things.
Okay, beautiful. So I have one more question. I just invite anyone watching to put their questions in, and we may be able to get to them. So my last question is, if someone is, again, people are coming in, people are learning more about their history, they're wanting to understand their roots, they want to understand who they are. If someone is coming in new, or any suggestions you have for anyone on this path, what are some ways that we can connect with this information in a way that's meaningful, in a way that can create a more fulfilling, connected life?
Well, of course, the first thing that people that want to return to our ways, to our legacy, if you will, and be connected to the Taino Resurgence movement, the first thing, the most obvious thing is to connect with one of us. You know, there's so many people in the Taino Resurgence movement, certainly myself and the organization that
Oh, I can't hear you. It looks like we lost your sound. There we go.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So we welcome people to come to us and ask us. I'm always happy to talk to people on the phone, to interact on FaceTime. We can text, whatever. All of these things. That's one way of introducing yourself to the Taino Resurgence movement. Of course, there's also a lot of online information, as you probably already have discovered. We have posted and published a great deal of information online about what we believe and how we manifest our tradition and our teachings. And that's another source of information that people can go to. There are not only text blogs, but there's also videos. We have video blogs and videos that we have posted and published in YouTube. So all of that is available to people to bring them up to date on the Taino Resurgence movement.
So I actually want to share, and we can post this later, but I want to share your website because I've been telling people that your website, you can literally be on there for years and just keep coming back. I mean, I'm fascinated by the work and your research and your dedication and focus. I mean, it's mind blowing. So the website is Caney Circle, Caney circle.wordpress.com. I mean, you've got information about the semis, the culture, you've got information on the different teachings, different rituals. I mean, you really have broken things down. And I wanted to ask you, how long did it take you to compile and build on all of this? Because I mean, again, it's an immense amount of work.
The Caney Circle has been in existence since 1981. So we have been at this for a very long time. We're going to be celebrating our 40th birthday next summer. But, and we were one of the very first organizations to actually formally organize in the Taino Resurgence movement. So the website, the web presence, our web presence began when I learned to deal with the internet, which I was, of course, I didn't know what this was. This was something very new to me. In the 2001 is when I got my first computer that could log on to the internet. And it was tough at first. It took me a while to get used to it, to know what it was all about. But it was around that time that we opened up our first website. And what you see now, the Caney Circle website is a kind of a continuation of that, a kind of an ongoing continuation of that. So it's been a while.
Okay. Okay. So we have a question. How does art, music, or dance play a role in Taino spiritual practice?
Yes. So that's a very important question. Taino culture was filled with all kinds of art, including performing art. So music and dance, like any other indigenous nation of North, Central, or South America, music and dance has always played a very important role. The Tainos uh, of the time when Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, the time of Ramon Panay. They talked, the chroniclers actually wrote down, these people love to dance, these people do dances, these people do music. But they didn't record, they didn't put down, nobody took the time to annotate our ancestors' songs. So we don't have an accurate account of what these songs sounded like. They describe the dances in pretty good detail. So we have a very good idea of the way that a lot of these dances, the people would stand in a circle holding hands and they would begin to dance. And the dance, there was a lot of foot stomping going on. So we do know something about the dance, but unfortunately we know very little about the music itself. So what we do now as modern day Tainos is that, fortunately for us, the people from whom the Tainos evolved, from whom the Tainos are derived, those people still exist. The Tainos, the ancestors of the Tainos came out, migrated into the Caribbean islands, into Boriquen, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Quisqueya, Haiti, Cuba, Jamaica. They came from South America, from the mainland, from the Amazon rainforest, and from another rainforest very close to the Amazon, which is called the Orinoco River rainforest. So these two mighty rivers of South America, that's where the ancestors of the Taino came from. And those people are still there. There's a lot of people there that are related to the Tainos in language, in culture, in tradition. They still plant yuca and process yuca into casabe bread. And they use words that are associated with our words, many of our words. So we know that those are the people from whom the Taino split off and came to the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. So when we go to them, we can learn a lot from those people because they're still doing their dances. They're still doing their music, and we can learn a lot from them. So some of our, there's a wonderful group, a wonderful community led by a cacique called Martin Casibopil. They promote the tradition of dance and music in a wonderful, I mean, they dress up like the original Tainos and they do these performances, these presentations of the Taino dances in which they actually present large dances. They have adopted many of the dance steps from these Amazon rainforest indigenous people. We in the Caney Circle have done something similar, but interestingly, we actually came to the Caribbean and found a traditional dance on the Caribbean islands. It was kind of like a surprise. A researcher, a Cuban researcher, found a community that does these rituals. They're called spiritism. And they have a lot of Christian and European elements in them. That's called syncretism. But embedded in that syncretic tradition, it's something that's not European, that's not Christian. It's Taino. So it's being grafted on to the European tradition. And we discovered this through research, through particularly a Cuban researcher by the name of Jose Antonio Garcia Molina, who did the research, and he discovered that these people are doing a dance, and they're not all Tainos. They don't identify all as Tainos. Some of them are, but there's others that are both descendants of Spanish, European Spanish, and some of them are descendants of African, Caribbean African people. But they all get together and do this dance. And the steps and the arm movements of this dance is not European in any way, shape, or form, or even of African origin, like many other things are in Cuba. It's Taino. And we know that for a fact, not only because of the research that Jose Antonio Garcia Molina did, but also because it looks exactly like what they're doing in South America. If you go to South America and you see those native people down there, they're doing the same step. Now, their music is different because the music that they do here in the Caribbean, these people that do this syncretic dance, it's very European, and they sing in Spanish. But when you go to South America, they're doing the same dance, but they're singing in the native language. So we know that this dance was brought intact from South America, made it to the Caribbean, evolved in the Caribbean, became a traditional dance of the Tainos. And when the Spanish came, it went underground, but it stayed, it survived, like many other things of our culture survived. So that's a beautiful thing that we have.
Mm-hmm. I've had conversations with other artists regarding the balance of preserving some of our tradition, and then also, right, as an artist, there's this creative flow, there's this inspiration that could potentially deviate from the tradition. So what's your opinion on that? How does one honor and preserve their tradition and also allow their uniqueness to be integrated in that?
The beauty of archaeological research, that's the people that go in there and dig up things, okay? The beauty of archaeological research is that these people that are studying these objects that our ancestors left behind, they realize that culture is not static. It doesn't stay put. It doesn't stay the same. Mm-hmm. The ancient people that came out of South America, I'll give you an example of one group. They're identified by the archaeologists as Saladoids. They had a beautiful tradition of ceramics where they made these beautiful ceramic pots out of reddish clay. And then they would paint on it with white paint, these wonderful, beautiful designs with white paint. So that's the typical, recognizable aspect, elements of Saladoid art, is these beautiful ceramic objects, clay pottery with white on red paint. That evolved. It evolved right out of existence. By the time that the Spanish arrived in the Caribbean, our ancestors were not doing that anymore. So evolution is part of being alive. Evolution, change, innovation, coming up with new things, creativity. Evolution is about, creativity is about evolution. It's about change. It's about evolving. We can maintain our identity. We can maintain our tradition, but it doesn't have to be frozen in the form of a museum piece. Our culture is not a museum piece. Our culture is alive. I'll give you an example. I'm going to bring something that I have sitting over here. Please forgive me leaving the screen for a minute.
No worries.
I am an oil painter.
Wow.
I paint in oils. Okay. So this painting, it evokes the legacy of our people. It is a painting of one of our female leaders in Cuba that I decided to do an allegorical homage to her. And I included elements of our culture in it. A wooden duho stool, I painted it, surrounded by the flowers of the flamboyant tree, which are beautiful flowers that are very traditional, very typical of our culture. And there's in the background the sun and the moon, because she has this beautiful song that goes, Yo trabajo con la luna, yo trabajo con el sol, sol y luna, préstame tu resplandor. This teacher taught that to me. I learned it from her. I added Taino words to it. Da kiayere da karaya, da kiayere da güey karaya, yere busika kuyo. So this painting is about that song. It's about her song. It's called Luna y Sol, sun and the moon, because that's what her song is all about. The energy of the moon and the sun, which is a very important element of our creation narrative. And it's in oil paints. Oil paints is not something that the Tainos did have paint. They painted on the walls of their caves. But it didn't look like this. Mm-hmm. This is my innovation. This is my contribution to the ongoing tradition of our ancestors. This is the way it evolves. So you see, evolution is part of the process.
I want to thank you for sharing that. And I want to thank you so much for singing. I was going back and forth in my head. I wanted to ask you to sing, but I was like, I don't want to put him on the spot. So thank you for reading my mind there, because I was showing someone earlier today that you did a chant as like a calling for Atabe. And I just want to say, like, I don't know what's going on in your brain, but for you to be a researcher and an author, and you know, the art that you have in the painting, you're very inspiring. So I appreciate you so much,
sister. I'm honored by you. Would you like to hear a real, I know we're tight for time, but I can sing you a little clip of that song.
Oh my God, I'd love that.
So it's a song dedicated to our mother, Atabe, the cosmic matriarch. It goes like this. Taino tiwakiata, Taino tiwakiata, Taino tiwakiata, Taino tiwakiata. Areitu areitu turei, areitu atabe, Taino tiwakiata, Taino tiwakiata.
That's beautiful. And you know, that's the power of music, right? And your voice, because these are things that I've never, I mean, I just started recently hearing, but there's something that happens within your body, your heart. There's, you know, it just evokes something within you. And I think that's the power of the voice and the power of using that vibration or that frequency. Because I just feel like it helps us to remember.
For us, the arts, including the performing arts like music and dance, are a vital element of our spirituality. We cannot manifest our spirituality without the arts. They go together. The early human beings created art to express their spirituality, and they're inseparable.
Beautiful. So we have just a few minutes left. Is there anything that, you know, maybe that we didn't talk about or that I didn't ask that you think is important to say or that you want to close with?
You know, this is a time of turmoil on the earth. I mean, we're in the midst right now of a global pandemic. And we, Tainos, can be a part of the healing process by manifesting our legacy as Tainos. We can be part of the healing process. So I feel that it's important for us to take on that role as healers, as people who are here to mend that which is broken. It's not just about a virus attacking the human body. This problem that has come onto the earth is attacking all of what we are, our society, our culture, our communities. not only in a health and in a financial, economic way, but in almost like a spiritual way. And we have to be strong so that we can heal that sickness. We have to call upon the energy of the healer woman, Guabonito, and bring her upon ourselves and become healers ourselves.
Thank you. Well, again, I'm a fan of yours. I honor you. I honor your work. I want to just publicly thank you for helping me with my personal project. You've been very generous. You've been incredibly helpful. And I just want to honor your beautiful spirit. Thank you for all the work that you've done that is far and wide that I think will continue. And I want to be an advocate of you and your work and hopefully do justice to the work that you've done. So again, thank you so much.
Well, it's a real honor working with you, Lynette, and I hope we can continue working. I know Cleveland is not that far from where I am, and I look forward to continuing to work with the Cleveland Taino community and you.
Beautiful, thank you. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining us. I hope that you've learned something, that you've gained something, that you were inspired by something today. And we look forward to potentially building on these talks. And I'll be also sharing a part of a project that I have going that is to go to Puerto Rico and to continue to research the Taino, the indigenous people of the island. And I just look forward to bringing more information to you. So again, thank you for your time and for being here. I hope you have a good evening.